Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. I am Emily Traxler, the VP of Customer Success here at ProLine. And thanks so much for joining me today. Today, we're going to walk through signed quote actions, which control what ProLine automatically does after a quote is signed. Let me go ahead and share my screen. This session is just really all about helping understand where these things live, how they behave, single versus multiple signers, and how to configure things like stage movement, deposit invoices, and follow up messages the correct way. Um, by the end of this session, you should feel confident setting up signed quote actions so your workflow runs smoothly after client signs a deal. Okay, so the before we talk about what these actions do, let's talk about where they live. So we're going to go into they live in the quote template level, which means every quote template in your account has its own site quote actions. You want to set these up for every single template so that it happens automatically when you create a quote. It lives in your library and it's just pulled from that library. Um, and ready to go. So we're going to go to hamburger menu, company settings, and then we're going to go down to our quote templates. Here we are. The first thing I'm going to do is choose this little pencil icon to edit the template. So roof replacement detail pricing. This is an easy one. And on the far right at the very bottom, we have assigned quote actions. There is a lot of information here. So we have an email, or my grammatical thing is getting in my way a little bit. So let's configure the actions ProLine will take when a quote is signed. Once you're editing the template and you've scrolled to the bottom, you are going to be able to control things like moving a project to a new stage, automatically sending a deposit invoice, sending confirmation emails or text messages. And one important rule to remember here is that if a quote has multiple signers, none of these actions will trigger until all of the signers have signed. And that distinction becomes especially important when we talk about partial versus fully signed quotes, which we'll dive into right now. We'll start with the partially signed quote stage. The first question here is like, does this quote require more than one signer? You can set the template up to have 1 or 2 signers. When you're creating a quote out in the field, you can update this setting, just so that you know. If you do have multiple signers, if you don't, then just skip this step. If you do, then you're gonna want to think about what stage you want this project to move to once the primary signer signs, but before the quote is fully signed. So you enable this option for multi-signer quotes, and then you select the stage you want the project to move to. And these stages come from your existing pipeline. So this is all just stuff that's in my account. Yours will look different than mine. Maybe, quotes can also be used for other things like insurance documentation, as you know. So we could say contingency signed. I could have this move over to um, deposit invoice if I also am going to trigger the deposit message coming after, maybe. The signed quote stage, what you do want to remember here is the quote is not fully signed at this point. So it just indicates that the first signer has signed. So if you want to have a stage that shows one signer has signed, we're waiting on a secondary signer, you could have it move over into a new stage. The next is just signed quote stage. This is just going to be what it moves to. So sales approved 1. This makes sense. The project has been won after everyone has signed the quote. This is for single signers, it's just immediately after that first signer signs the quote. For multi-signer quotes, this stage only triggers after every required signer has signed. The primary signer alone does not trigger the signed quote action. So this signed quote stage, even with one signature, will not trigger. It will only trigger after both signatures have been entered. If the secondary signer never signs, the quote just remains in our sent status. The signed quote stage doesn't trigger, and none of the remaining signed quote actions will run. So this just ensures that automation only happens once once the quote is truly complete. The next up is auto send deposit invoice. So just allows us to send a deposit invoice once a quote is fully signed. But let's see, we can do the deposit or balance or other. There's lots of options here. Um, One important thing to remember is that the invoice template must use the deposit calculation mode. So, let me show you that as well. Popping up here. We're going to want to deposit calculation mode. So I will need, in order to do this, I'm going to need to have input a deposit calculation, just so that you know. And then I can have my signed quote send this deposit invoice automatically after both signatures have been sent. Here, I'm going to just keep that in quote sent. And so I don't totally mess up my demo account. I always play around with things in here while I'm on these office hours, and then I try to run test and have just mixed everything up. So we have a signed quote text message here. Um, this just means what message do you want for them to receive after they have signed the quote. So we have variables. You click this button to see all the variables listed here. Um, I have hi, first name. Thank you for trusting us with your roof replacement. You'll find your signed quote document with this link, and it's going to send them the signed quote. That way that they have that in their text message box. And then you can do the same with the email, and you can even send them an attached PDF. It does not have to only be sent to them via the link. Make sure you include that link. It is so easy for people to review. Customers love it. Make sure that that link is included for both the email and the text if you're sending those out for confirmation, which I hope you are. Um, Again, these messages are only going to send for after all of the required signers have signed. So if you have a single signer, that one signature is going to trigger all of these things. And if you don't, it's multi-signer. Both signatures have to happen for the rest of these things to happen beyond that partially signed action. If you want your customers, so attaching the PDF, just one thing to note, I like sending a PDF. Some people like to just print things. However, if you want them to be interacting mostly with your customer portal, you might want to leave it off. Uh, Especially if they're signing digitally, they probably will monitor things in the portal if you offer that to them. So that's something to think about. And it really is that simple, guys. Recap, signed quote actions happen on the quote template level. Partially signed quote stages apply only to multi-signer quotes. And that again is this section here. Signed quote actions trigger after all signers have signed. Auto send deposit invoice is going to happen based on having a deposit configured and all signatures collected. Emails and text messages, all signatures need to be collected. Fully customizable here, using your own variables. And yeah, once these settings are configured correctly, let's go up here and save and close. Detail pricing multi-option. And that's it. I can update each of my quote templates to have these settings, and then I'm good to go when my sales team is ready to jump in here and create quotes. Let's see if we have any questions about this. Okay, I'll stop sharing, but if you have any feedback about our quote signatures, please submit ideas on our ideas board. That's how we make improvements every single week. And if you have further questions about this, reach out to my support team anytime. Um, oh, okay. We have someone who wants some help setting up their quotes. Let me see. Will, I'm sending you my email address to cover that so we can get that done for you too. All right, everyone, just one little thing about our quotes that is configurable out of all of the many options we have. I'm really happy to have you join us today. And yeah, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for joining office hours. Bye.